Have other scientists acknowledged these design features of the flagellum?
Yes, they have. If you could advance the next slide. In 1998, a man named David de Rosier wrote an article in the journal Cell, which is a very prestigious scientific journal, entitled The Turn of the Screw, the Bacterial Flagellar Motor. Now, David de Rosier is a professor of biology at Brandeis University in Massachusetts and has worked on the bacterial flagellar motor for most of his career. Now, in that article, he makes a statement, quote, "More so than other motors, the flagellum resembles a machine designed by a human," close quote. So David de Rosier also recognizes that the structure of the flagellum appears designed.
What I wrote was, this is a machine that looks like it was designed by a human, but that doesn't mean it was designed. That is the product of intelligent design. Indeed, this more has all the earmarks of something that arose by evolution.
Med hjälp av ett elektronmikroskop ser vi bilder av vad som rör sig inne i motorn.
This is the drive shaft. This transmits this torque generated by the motor. That would then turn the propeller, which would push the bacterial cell through the fluid.
Michael Behe menar att flagellen inte kan ha utvecklats genom naturligt urval eftersom delarna var för sig inte har någon funktion som urvalet kan verka på. Men motbeviset kommer i form av en annan bakterie som kan injicera gift.
This is a structure found, for example, in Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes the bubonic plague. And look at the similarities. Now, this structure doesn't rotate, but it still has to extend this structure, which is equivalent to the rod, the drive shaft here. It has to extend that because it needs this little channel. It's like sort of like a syringe. So the virulence factors that are made inside the cell, which is down here, can be exported, pushed up into this hole, and exported out through this long kind of needle, perhaps into a cell in your body or mine, and thereby create misery.
Och det visar sig att det finns skäl till att de två strukturerna liknar varann. Sprutan till höger består av delvis samma proteintyper som finns längst ner i flagellen till vänster. Sprutan saknar de proteiner som finns i motorn och kan därför inte rotera. Men den fungerar perfekt som sjukdomsspridare.
So if we think about what it means to be irreducibly complex, the argument is that if you take away even one of these proteins, that the structure cannot function. And yet here is a structure that functions, that is missing several of the proteins, and yet here it is, a working viable organelle of the bacterium. So indeed, this structure is not, in that sense, irreducibly complex.
För att understryka de Rosiers poäng bar Miller ett ovanligt klädtillbehör i rätten.
As an example of what irreducible complexity means, advocates of intelligent design like to point to a very common machine, the mousetrap. And the mousetrap is composed of 5 parts. It has a base plate, the catch, a spring, a little hammer that actually does the dirty work, and a bait holder. The mousetrap will not work if any one of these 5 parts are taken away. That's absolutely true. But remember the key notion of irreducible complexity, and that is that this whole machine is completely useless until all the parts are in place. Well, that turns out not to be true. And I'll give you an example. What I have right here is a mousetrap from which I've removed 2 of the 5 parts. I still have the base plate, the spring, and the hammer. Now, you can't catch any mice with this, so it's not a very good mousetrap. But it turns out that despite the missing parts, it makes a perfectly good, if somewhat inelegant, tie clip. And when we look at the favorite examples for irreducible complexity. And the bacterial flagellum is a perfect example. We find the molecular equivalent of my tie clip, which is we see parts of the machine missing 2, 3, 4, maybe even 20 parts, but still fulfilling a perfectly good purpose that could be favored by evolution. And that's why the irreducible complexity argument falls apart.
No.
Men Behe menade också att evolutionen inte kan förklara det nätverk av organ och celler som skyddar oss mot sjukdomar.
I have some specifics I want to ask. Has the theory of evolution, in particular natural selection, explained the existence of the defensive apparatus such as the immune system?
No.
Do you consider it a problem?
I certainly consider it to be a problem. But other scientists who think that Darwinian evolution simply is true don't consider much of anything to be a problem for their theory.
If you could highlight the second full paragraph of Darwin's black box, page 138. What you say is, we can look high or we can look low, in books or in journals, but the result is the same. The scientific literature has no answers on the question of the origin of the immune system.
And in the context, that means that the scientific literature has no detailed, testable answers to the question of how the immune system could have arisen by random mutation and natural selection.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
What I did was to pile on the witness stand articles all having very sophisticated explanations for how the immune system evolved, and it basically challenged him to respond given the claims he'd made.
Now, Dr. Behe, these articles rebut your assertion that literature answers on the origin of the vertebrate immune system.
No, they certainly do not. My argument is that these articles have no detailed for how complex biochemical systems could arise by a random mutation in that, and these articles do not address that.
And then he starts to say, well, have you read this book, Dr. Behe? And he starts to pile these up on Behe's witness stand. Eventually, Behe was almost dwarfed by the stack of scientific literature on the evolutionary origin of the immune system.
All these hard-working scientists published article after article over years and years, full books, addressing the question of how the vertebrate immune system evolved. But none of them are satisfactory to you.
That's a lawyer's trick. Purely a lawyer's trick. Now, was Michael Behe going to read every one of those books before? It was totally theatrics.
Mr. Rothschild?
Would you like your books back? They're heavy.